Um, Tonight I want you to take out your notepads, get your pens and pencils or whatever you're going to be writing with ready, because there's a lot of information getting ready to come down the pipe tonight. How many of you in here tonight and on stream, you love paying property taxes? How many of you love tax increases? Come on now. I thought you were church kingdom people. Y'all don't like paying taxes? He sounds like keeping my money. I think it's very important and very strategic that the type of things that I bring to you guys, because many people won't search it out. And what better place to be informed on kingdom knowledge than in the house of God? I want to challenge and encourage other pastors that may be watching to start stepping up and bringing these things to your congregation so that they can be more kingdom-minded. Because we've got a lot of work to do for God, and we need to make sure that our money is properly allocated and use the system that has been the system of the world to do what it can do so that we have more finances to build the kingdom. Amen? And so I want to first introduce to you a gentleman that I met. I can't remember what you were running for the first time we met. But his name is Scott Grigg, and Scott is currently running for the Collin County Tax Assessor Collector. How many like tax collectors? So he's going to give you a lot of insight into the office of the tax collector, how that works, and how you can protest your property taxes. You wouldn't expect to get that from somebody that's going to be holding office, would you? That's the difference in kingdom-minded people. When we get kingdom people in office, they want to make sure that you have a kingdom perspective on how to do these things properly. So at this time, I want to bring up to have a seat on the stage, Scott Grigg. Give Scott a hand as he comes and takes his place. Our first actual presenter tonight is going to be a gentleman that's been a dear friend of mine for many years now. He's the former Convention of States state director. You guys know I'm very involved in the Convention of States. I had Mark Meckler here a while back. This gentleman, he and I are so close-knit, we even share the same birthday and the same birth year. That is by divine appointment. But he and I, we connect for years on the same stuff on such a tight level. And I believe he's currently running for chairman of the Collin County Republican Party. He sits on the Plano City Council. Put your hands together for my good friend, my twin brother, Shelby Williams. Go ahead. And Shelby's going to kick off, and they'll take care of you on your slides. Anywhere you want to start.
I'm just going to do this, but I need you to transition slides if I can, please. So I know that everybody here is as jazzed as I am to talk about property taxes, right? When you think property taxes, you're all amped up. You're like, yeah, let's get to it. You may be after this. So a lot of what people experience when they think about property taxes is, kind of a knot in the pit of your stomach, maybe in the pit of your checkbook. But a lot of it is because the property tax system has become very convoluted in Texas and mystified. We're going to demystify all that for you. So I'm probably going to get up and pace a little bit. I hope the camera crew is okay with that. So we've got a double feature. This is the 6th year in a row that Scott Grigg and I have done this Property Tax 101 seminar. So test that. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to get out of the way a little bit here. So that's me. I have the privilege of serving on Plano City Council in the May 28th runoff election for Collin County Republican Party chair. These QR codes here, you can scan these. You should be able to scan them if you're watching at home. These go to our websites. So I've been involved in property tax reform efforts in the state legislature in Austin for many years.
Can you throw the slides up on the QR codes on the side screen? If you guys scan the ones that are going to go up on the side screens, you'll be able to download the slides.
Perfect.
There they are.
Yep, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, so this entire slide deck you can download. You may want to replay the commentary. So, Scott, please take a moment and tell the folks about yourself.
As Shelby said, my name is Scott Grigg. I am running to be the tax collector in Collin County, and I'm proud to say that my team worked very hard. We got 55% in a three-person race, and I am the Republican nominee over in Collin County. I used to be the finance manager over at the tax office, so I know the ins and outs of that. It's strange that a tax collector is actually a proponent of lowering taxes. I've been fighting for lowering taxes and also educating folks on how the system works so they know where to put their efforts in trying to keep their taxes low. So happy to answer any questions even beyond this. Like I said, go to my website, you can send me messages, but I'm happy to be here and looking forward to this evening. So.
Yeah, we are both very accessible. Our email addresses are up here on the screen, our websites. I publish my personal cell phone number. I only got one phone number. So please feel free to get in touch with us with any questions. Next slide, please. So 2 parts we're going to walk through tonight. First, I'm going to cover how the property tax system works in Texas. We're going to cover understanding the whole process, the components, what it's made up of, as well as schools and Robin Hood, colloquially known as Robin Hood, more formally known as recapture. We're going to talk about property tax relief options for homeowners, as well as some of the things that have passed through the state legislature. And lastly, we're going to take a brief look at the potential future of Texas taxes that I'm advocating for. Scott, you want to walk through your portion?
What we're going to do, my part, we're going to talk about how to protest your property appraisals. We see these appraisal notices come out, and they're going to be here soon. If you haven't gotten them already, I got a phone call today that the first one, I think, Williamson County has already hit. So when those appraisal notices come out, we're going to talk about what to look for on that notice. Make sure you're reviewing it. Make sure you have all the exemptions you're supposed to. Then we're going to get into how to properly protest your appraisal. And then I'm going to do a little bit, which the city council and school board members that have endorsed me hate when I say this, but we're also going to talk about holding them accountable. Because there's 2 parts of your equation, what your appraisal is and what your tax rate is. And we're going to get a little bit into that. So.
That's right. Next slide, please. So a few things to note. First, there is no commercial or financial interest in this seminar. Scott and I do this as a public service. We're not even going to offer to sell you a timeshare. Okay?
Unless you want to buy mine.
We do this now because, as Scott said, annual appraisals are coming out right now. You're going to have 30 days before the protest deadline. So if you want to protest your appraisal, that's coming up May 15th. So that's why we do this every year right around now. The material we're going to cover tonight is a 101 level course. We call this Property Tax 101. This is not going to make an appraisal expert of anybody, but this will arm you with enough information to understand how all this works and what to do. Next slide, please. All right. If you don't know what comps are, when you go to protest your appraisal, you're going to need comps. These are comparisons, comparable properties to your property. So you're going to need to be armed with this. Scott's going to cover this a little later. This nice woman in the front row is Shelby Johnston, no relation. You can scan her QR code over here, and she's got some flyers out front, I believe. And you can contact her. She is a local area realtor with more than 10 years of experience. She can help you find the most appropriate comps for your property when it comes time for you to submit your protest. So you can reach out to her with the information you need, for the information you need, and with the information you need to give her. All right, next slide, please. So now we're going to cover how the property tax system works in Texas. It's important to know up front that property taxes are the main mechanism for funding local government. By local government, we mean cities, school districts, college districts and special districts, okay? The state collects 6.25% sales tax. Municipalities have the option of additional 2%. That's where you get 8.25% sales tax in most parts of the state. But property taxes are the primary means of funding local government. So we don't like the property taxes, we don't want to pay them, but good government does come with a certain amount of overhead. But responsible taxation and spending is what it's all about. So we're going to go into how the property tax system in Texas works. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of confusion about this. Part of the reason is because the Texas property tax system was codified in our Constitution 150 some odd years ago. We lived in an agrarian economy at the time with no technology, and that was how, again, local government was funded, how property was assessed for value when land was the primary means of producing wealth. As our economy has evolved over the past century and a half, as our technology has evolved, we've applied 150 years worth of Band-Aids and tourniquets to our property tax system in a kind of a hodgepodge mess of stuff in the legislative code. So we're going to talk about differentiating the tax rate from the tax burden. A lot of word games are played with local elected officials over those. We'll get into that. And what I call the property tax game of three-card Monte, follow the queen. So if you confront your city council member like me, why are my property taxes so high? You may hear, well, we don't set the value of your property. We have nothing to do with that. If you're wise to that and you say, well, I know you set the tax rate against my property, so why are my taxes so high? Well, the school board takes more. Go talk to them. You go talk to the school board members like, hey, Robin Hood takes a third of it. Go talk to them. And then everybody points the finger at the Central Appraisal District trying to absolve themselves of blame. So there are a couple of things to note with the property tax rate. There is something called the no new revenue rate, which used to be called the effective tax rate, which nobody knew what that meant, probably on purpose. And there's the voter approval rate. And so these names were changed in 2019 with Senate Bill 2. So we're going to cover all that as well. There's another component that we'll get to as well. That is the you may have heard M&O and INS. That stands for Maintenance and Operations and Interest in Sinking. We'll demystify that in a little bit. Next slide, please. All right. So the basics of the Texas property tax system. Obviously, it was codified in our Constitution, as we discussed. Now, we're going to use Collin County and Plano as the example for everything we discuss here because, well, in Plano, this is what I know. This is where I have the best data. So residents in Plano, on average, pay about 2% of the taxable value of their property every year in property taxes. All right? So if you have a property worth $100,000, to make the math easy, I don't think you can get anything that cheap in Plano anymore, but you're going to pay about $2,000 every year in property taxes. There are some exceptions to this, which we'll cover. So as we discussed, local government is primarily funded by that. Now, municipalities, again, have the option of an additional 2% sales tax on top of the state's 6.25%. Now, if you are, interestingly, if you are in a DART member city, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, like Plano is, for the privilege of being a DART member city, you get to fork over half your sales tax directly to DART. For the city of Plano in the upcoming year, that's anticipated to be $117 million in sales tax going straight to the DART system. So, yeah, I'll do a whole other seminar on that. The county appraisal district determines your property value. They don't actually send an appraiser out to your home every year to do this. Their job is just to try to figure out what the fair market value of your home is. They use a variety of methods to do this, which Scott will cover. When it leaves the appraisal district, that's the first part of the process. The local taxing authorities, that's the independent school districts, the cities, the counties, college, the MUDs, the SUDs, and all the other alphabet soups, they set the tax rate against that aggregate property value across the whole taxing jurisdiction, like the city, to determine how much of your cold hard cash you're actually going to have to pay in your tax bill. Property value is irrelevant to how much you actually pay in taxes. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. the property value in aggregate is irrelevant. We'll get to why. Next slide, please. All right, so here's the process. January 1st appraisals begin. As Scott's going to cover, your appraisal and your comps should be as close to January 1st as possible. If you were building a mother-in-law suite in your home and you broke ground on January 2nd, they're not supposed to count it, right? January 1st. April 15th, right around now, valuations are mailed. You get those in the mail, you say, hey, your property is worth $11 bajillion. We're going to tax you for every penny of it. 1 month later is the protest deadline. In June, most ISDs set their tax rate, and in September, most of the Plano City Council and Collin County set our tax rates. So the property values are set first before the taxing authorities, the local governments, get a hold of this. Your final tax bill, the amount you actually pay, is 100% determined by the ISD, the city, the county, and the College Board. There's a little asterisk for the ISD based on Robin Hood, et cetera. We'll get to that. But your local elected officials are the ones you need to talk to about your property taxes, not the Central Appraisal District. You should work through the Central Appraisal District on the taxable value of your property. That's what Scott's whole portion is going to be about. But we have total control over your final tax bill. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a sample appraisal. A couple of important things to note here. We're not going to cover all of this, but the main things you're looking for on here are in the far right column, proposed, this is from 2023, obviously, proposed for 2023, there's the total market value. That's what your property might sell for on the open market. Your taxable value, your appraised value with possible homestead exemptions, is less than that. You apply various exemptions, which we'll get to. The taxable value of your land, which is previous taxable values here, broken up by district, the taxable value is what you're actually taxed on. Your market value can start out up here, and you apply a homestead exemption and a few other exemptions, and a couple of other protections in all the Band-Aids that have been applied to our property tax system, you get your taxable value. The tax rate that determines your tax bill is set against the taxable value, not the market value. Now, if you, I'm going to use myself as an example. 7 years ago, my wife and I and our girls, we moved from far east Plano to far west Plano to be closer to school and work. We'd had our home in East Plano for about 15 years. There's a limit by state law that your taxable value cannot increase by more than 10% per year. Well, when property values started going haywire after about 2011, then property values started going up, 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30% a year. If you had a homestead property, your main home, then that was limited to 10% per year. So we had many years of that protection built in. When we moved, we lost all of it. So we have 3 kids, and we moved from a single-story home to a 2-story home across the city, and our property tax bill doubled overnight because we lost all of those protections. And the value of our new home was more than our old home. Had a smaller footprint, smaller lot size. We weren't putting any more wear and tear on the streets. In fact, less. We moved to be closer to school and work. But our property tax bill doubled. So the taxable value is what's important. Next slide, please. Okay, here are the components. Here's what we have down here. M&O, maintenance and operations, that's kind of intuitive. That's the daily, day-to-day operations of a government. INS stands for interest and sinking. What the heck does that mean? It means the debt, the bonds, the bond debt. So as an aside, every time a school district or a city or a county is proposing a bond and they say this won't affect your taxes, that's wordplay. You are on the hook for every single penny. You, the taxpayer, are on the hook for every single penny. When they say this won't affect your taxes, what they mean is they're timing the issuance of that bond so that an old bond is being paid off as the new bond is coming online and sold. And then you're still paying. So if that old bond were retired and you didn't approve the new bond, your tax bill is going to go down. So yes, you pay every penny. Don't ever believe otherwise. So the school districts by far comprise the lion's share of your tax bill. So the bright red here is the maintenance and operations. These are actually broken up into separate components by law. The debt is exempt from some of the calculations for what determines the no new revenue tax rate, which we'll explain a little more in a bit, and the voter approval rate, because the bonds were already voted on. The voters already weighed in. And so that's why the INS, the debt rate, is separate. The M&O rate comprises most of it, the INS a little bit more. In your area, I don't have charts for every area, but in your area, the more the dark red is, the more debt you have. But then there's recapture. This is Robin Hood. Doesn't apply everywhere. If you are what the state considers a property-rich school district, then then the government reaches in and pulls out the entire black portion and redistributes it to property-poor school districts. Now, the example I always use to illustrate recapture, Robin Hood, is from the movie Donnie Brasco. It's a mob movie with Johnny Depp and Al Pacino. And raise your hands if you've seen Donnie Brasco. Okay, so a number of people. So there's this scene. I mean, it's a mob movie, you know. There's this scene. It's an FBI agent infiltrates the mob. And there's a scene at their hangout. The guy that Al Pacino plays is banging on a parking meter, really loud, you know, trying to bust it open. You know, they swiped the parking meter, they brought it back to the hangout, and they're trying to bust it open. And the guy who's the crew boss now, he's got a headache, he's really irritable. He's saying, will you knock off that racket? And he's unleashing his stress, and he says, I'm a skipper now. I'm trying to do the accent. I'm a skipper now. 50 grand a month, I got to kick up to Sunny Red. That's Robin Hood. No matter what the school districts do with the tax rate, they got to kick up money to the state via Robin Hood. So that's my mafia comparison to the to the Robin Hood program. So the black portion, the recapture, that only applies to school districts. Now, the city takes the next most, probably universally across the state. The county is also funded by property taxes. I should have mentioned that. So the county takes the next, and then special districts usually take the least. In Collin County, we have the Collin College District. Dallas College District in Dallas County, they take the very least. Now, the total tax, as we see here, is about 2%, 1.91% of the property value. In Plano, this is, and the average home value has gone up since then, but it's about $9,500 for what was an average home value of $500,000. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk about the rollback rate and the effective tax rate, the voter approval rate, and the no new revenue rate. Part of the challenge we had in Texas was that the property tax system we were under was codified in 1981 in state law. Some of you may remember inflation in 1981. Mm-hmm. Some of you probably still wake up with night terrors due to the inflation in 1981. So the rollback rate, what it was called, was set at 8% in 1981. This was the maximum amount. Oh, is the mic cutting out? This was the maximum amount to which local taxing authorities could raise your taxes in any given year without allowing the voters to have a say on it. 8%. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, if you remember what inflation was like in 8%, or in 1981, the logic here was, all right, cities, counties, school districts, you can raise your taxes enough to keep pace with inflation. Okay? Well, Reagan came into office. Paul Volcker slammed the brakes on the economy. There was a momentary jolt. The Reagan economy kicked in. Inflation came way down, and it pretty much stayed that way until about 2011. And for most of that period, inflation and property values kind of did this together. They rose together gradually. and nobody thought anything about it. Cities, counties, school boards, et cetera, they had a set it and forget it tax rate. Their tax rate stayed the same for many, many years. And as property values slowly went up with inflation, they got commensurate increase in tax revenues. Nobody thought anything about it. Until 2011 or so, the fracking boom started, jobs started flooding into Texas, property values started to go up. First, they went up 3% a year, then 5%, then 8%, then like 12%, and then suddenly, holy cow, 12% property values. We've got this 8% rollback rate. We've been milking this for a few years without adjusting our tax rate. Like we collected a 7% tax increase last year and nobody knew. Now it's 9%. If anybody knows about that, they get to have an election and we got to tell them what we've been doing the whole time. So they started fiddling with the tax rate so that they would wind up with in many cases, a 7.99% tax increase, just under that rollback rate. So they didn't have to allow the voters a say. But rounded up, 8% year over year, that's going to crush you pretty quickly. And it did. It crushed many people. This was really, and that's why we had property tax reform efforts in Austin in 2019 via Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3. This was really driven home to me the very first year that Scott and I did our Property Tax 101 in Plano. A gentleman who had a rental property approached me after the seminar, and he's got this rental property that he rented to a widow on a fixed income. Renters get zero protection under state law, not until this past year, for property value increases and the accompanying taxes. You get no homestead exemption, even if that's your primary home, because you rent it. It's actually the landlord's home. You get no over 65 freeze. You get no disability exemption. You get squat. Taxes had gotten so out of control on that rental home that this gentleman was subsidizing this widow to live in his own rental property. He was paying out of his pocket to cover the additional taxes because she's on a fixed income and she could no longer afford to pay the rent. This comes to a very important point. Many people who rent in the state of Texas, they think they don't pay any taxes. They pay all of it. That is all baked into their rent except that portion that gentleman was subsidizing for the widow, obviously. Renters pay all of it. And in fact, renters pay more tax per square foot than homeowners do. They just don't realize they pay it because it's all baked into their rent. So very important to remember. So in 2019, that rollback rate was lowered from 8% to 2.5%. Okay, pretty dramatic drop. But if you remember, in 2019, inflation was less than 2.5%, or around 2.5%. So very shortly after they did this, inflation shot back up again to 40-year highs. But what happened is this was lowered to 2.5% for cities. For schools, 3.5% for cities and counties. Special districts still got to keep it at 8%. They got a little bit of gravy on that one. But there's some calculations here I'm not going to go into, but the no new revenue rate, this was formerly called the effective tax rate. What that simply means is the taxing jurisdiction, the city, the county, whatever, is not going to collect any more in tax this year than they collected last year on properties that were taxed in both years. So it doesn't include brand new properties that were just built. It just means we're keeping taxes flat. I'm very proud to say that we did this in Plano for 4 years in a row after I was elected in 2019. We kept taxes flat for 4 years in a row. So this was renamed the no new revenue rate, which is much more intuitive than effective tax rate. Nobody ever knew what that meant. So it's more intuitive. If you're going to adopt the no new revenue rate, which technically we did 3 years because it switched, came into effect after the first year when we technically adopted the effective tax rate. People know much better what it means. So the the Plano ISD, so we see here that the city of Plano had the no new revenue rate for the 4th year in a row. The Plano ISD had a voter approval tax rate election. This was in 2022-23. Inflation had already kicked in, and this was the school district. So even though inflation has shot back up now, those rates, 2.5% for schools and 3.5% for cities and counties, are codified in state law just like the former 8% rate was. And even if inflation continues to run rampant, I say good, give the voters a say. If you're still going to raise their taxes, make the case. The Plano School District made their case, and it was approved. Okay? But government should have to be accountable. Government should have to make that case and shouldn't get to ride the tax gravy train. All right, next slide, please. So here are some slides that I picked from 2019. And remember, 2019 was when we started to keep taxes flat. So this is stuff that I showed in my first campaign for city council. And I'm using the history from this because it was pretty calm for the 4 years that we adopted the no new revenue rate. So this shows the tax rate versus the tax burden. So this shows the tax rates for the largest metroplex cities. Plano has a pretty low rate, right? Only outdone by Louisville and Frisco in 2019. The rates are pretty low. When a politician tells you how low their tax rate is, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter because it's applied against the property value. Next slide, please. Well, Plano has some expensive property. The rate has to be low. You know, trash trucks cost the same pretty much anywhere in the Metroplex. It just depends on whether you're getting the fancier model or the basic entry model. So if the average property value in one city is $250,000 and the average property value in Plano is $500,000, then you would expect the tax rate in Plano to be about half that in the other city if they're going to collect the same amount of taxes to perform the same city services. Now, cities have different populations, different needs, et cetera, so it's not like every city should collect the exact same amount, but citizens should be aware of what they're collecting, how they're spending it, and why. Next slide, please. So when we talk about word games, this is one of the things that drives me nuts. And it's not exclusive to what Plano did, but this chart shows supposedly how low Plano's taxes were in 2019. Look at all these cities charging more tax. I've highlighted it here so you can see it. This is based on the Plano average home value of $369,000. What that means is it's applying other cities' tax rates, or I'm sorry, Plano's tax rate, remember it's a low tax rate, against other cities' home values. So it's basically swapping it. So unless you're going to Oz and a tornado picks up your house and drops it off somewhere else, that's not how real estate works. Shelby can tell you. The exact same home in Plano and Fort Worth are not going to be worth the same. They're just not. Okay, so applying one city's tax rate to another's average home value does not yield what you actually pay in taxes. Next slide, please. This shows that Plano's actual tax burden, which is what you care about, is middle of the pack. Not the lowest, not the highest, dead middle of the pack for these cities. And that's what's important to understand when you hear from politicians, local elected officials, what goes into your property taxes. They will talk about the rate all day long. How many rates is it going to take to put your kid through college? How many loaves of bread can you buy with a rate? How many rates did it cost to fill your gas tank today? It's nonsense. Takes cold hard cash, takes dollars. Sometimes crypto, but we're not going there. Next slide, please. All right. This is the very dead simple calculation. So if you come away with anything tonight, other than from my portion, memorize all of Scott's. If you come away with anything tonight, this is it. This is how your property taxes are determined. The property value is set first. You get your appraisal like you're going to in a few days. You go through your whole protest process like Scott's going to coach you on. You get your comps to do that like Shelby's going to set you up with. Then the local taxing authorities, the cities, the school districts, et cetera, they're going to figure out how much they need to collect in taxes that year. They say, we need $500 million to run the city, okay? So if the average property value is this much, then they're going to set the tax rate at however much is going to give them $500 million to run the city. It's easy. If all of the property in the city doubled in value overnight, let's say that tornado picked up Disney World and dropped it in Frisco, or picked up Universal and dropped it in Frisco, then all the property values double overnight. Well, the Frisco City Council just cuts the rate in half and they collect the exact same amount of money they collected last year. If the property values drop in half overnight, my condolences, but if they do, then you just double the rate and you still collect the exact same amount in taxes that you did last year. Next slide, please. So this is where I used data from before we started to adopt the no new revenue rate, so you can see the disparity here. So the red line is the actual average tax burden. Now remember, the average home value in Plano now in 2024 is over $500,000. Back in 2019, the average was about $380,000. So the average tax burden is the red line. The green line is the inflation rates. Obviously, since 2021, that's spiked. The blue is the average income. It started to dip in 2017. So the tax burden dramatically outpaced inflation as well as our ability to pay taxes. That's why we so desperately needed the property tax reform efforts that we got through the state legislature in 2019. This chart right here. Now, if you look at this for Plano from 2019 through last year, then it's like it's flat. I mean, inflation's going up, and I actually did do a chart for this that I presented at the city council meeting last year. We had our first tax increase last year after 4 years of being flat because inflation was catching up to us too. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the protections available under state statute. Not every taxing jurisdiction offers all of these, but they are available in many areas. You have to actually apply for these through the Central Appraisal District. There's a disabled ceiling. Like if you're disabled, then your taxes can just be cut off at a certain ceiling. And doesn't matter what happens with your property value, you're not on the hook for any more thereafter. There's a disabled deduction of $40,000. That might have actually changed last year. There's an over 65 ceiling. If you're over 65, then your taxes can be frozen at that level. And if you live to be 165, then you're really got it good property tax-wise. And probably otherwise if you're living to 165. There's an over 65 deduction as well as a homestead exemption. Now, the homestead exemption, that did change last year in the state legislature. We'll cover that in a little bit. That got bumped up to a maximum of $100,000. But there's the $100,000 or 20%. In Plano, you're actually better off with 20% than the $100,000 because of the average property value. So the kicker at the bottom, you have to file for these because the county does not know who's eligible for what. They don't track that. And maybe the NSA does and the CIA, but not the county. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Robinhood a little bit. So Robinhood, formerly known as recapture, is, like we talked about, they take money from property-rich school districts and give it to property-poor school districts. The number of property-rich school districts is ballooning year over year, but they still have this in place. So in Plano, this makes up about 15% of our entire tax bill. That whole 2%, like let's say you have a $500,000 home in Plano, that's $10,000 in property taxes. About 1,500 of that goes straight to the state for recapture, straight out of the district. And it's about almost a quarter of the entire school district's taxes. So the school district does collect more of our taxes. For Robin Hood payee cities and school districts, I give them a bit of a break because, again, the Donnie Brasco comparison. They're on the hook to pay this no matter what they do with their school district. So this down here shows some stats. So in 1993, $127 million was taken from just 34 school districts, pulled out of 34 school districts. In 2021, this had amped up to $3 billion with a B, taken from 158 school districts. 1 billion, more than a billion, had been taken just from Plano ISD since 1993. La Jolla ISD is a Robin Hood recipient, a property poor school district. So this shows some of the lack of the guardrails in this program. La Jolla ISD built this $20 million water park owned by the school district that operates at a loss. So they wanted even more tax money to shore up the operations. But do it for the children. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was in 2019 with Senate Bill 2. $5 billion in property tax relief, $3.6 billion in Robin Hood relief. This is temporary. As we're going to see, we got some property tax relief again last year. It's temporary. $70 million reduction in Robin Hood for the Plano ISD, again, using Plano as the examples. And importantly, ISDs cannot increase property taxes by more than 2.5%. Cities and counties can't increase by more than 3.5%. Next slide, please. So this is some of the property tax transparency that came along with that same bill, Senate Bill 2. It put in real-time tax notices for taxpayers to engage in the rate-setting process. You can look at this online. It informs taxpayers of which of your taxing authorities, thank you, which of your taxing authorities has a proposed rate increase, and by how much, and how you can protest. The info you get from that isn't going to be as good as Scott gives you, but still, it's something going. And provides taxpayers with an online form to submit their position on the proposed rates. Like, you guys are out of your mind. What are you doing? That's a position. Next slide, please. Now, last year, we had $13.3 billion of tax relief, sort of. We had a record $32.7 billion sales tax surplus in the state. Remember, the state gets the 6.25% statewide. The legislature had planned for one amount. They do this biennially. Our state legislature meets once every 2 years by the Constitution, and they're limited to a 5-month session to limit the damage that they can do while they're in Austin. Imagine if they were there year-round, like in Washington. My goodness. So less than half of that was actually spent on property tax relief. But we got something. There was and I say temporary, a reduction to the school M&O property taxes. So you may notice that your anticipated tax bill this year isn't going up as high as you thought. That's because a lot of that $13.3 billion is applied to buy down the school's maintenance and operation rate. That is a one-time gift. That is due to the sales tax surplus. Even if we have another sales tax surplus for the next biennium, the state legislature would have to say, yeah, let's do that again. Let's buy down the M&O school rate. Hopefully it would happen. Don't bank on it. There's also, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is the first little bone thrown to renters. Under state law, we've had a limit of 10% increases to the taxable value every year for a homestead, an owned single-family property. It doesn't apply to rentals, doesn't apply to commercial. Finally, we got a 20% limit to the annual tax increase in taxable value for a rental or commercial property. 20% is really high. renters need more. Property owners need more, whether or not it's their home. Plus, this has a sunset. If the state legislature does not vote to renew it next legislative session, then it's just going to go away, and we're going to go right back to the way things were, and more widows are going to have to be subsidized to live in their rental homes. The homestead exemption was raised to $100,000, but again, in a city like Plano with the average property value over $500,000, you're better off with the 20% exemption than the $100,000 exemption. And in the 50 largest counties in the state, we got 254 counties in the state, voters will elect 3 members of the appraisal district board. This is the first time that voters will get a say in who is on the appraisal district board. These were not, they're just appointed. Next slide, please. So, this is what I have been pursuing, not just me, in the state legislature for a few years. So we're just going to talk about this for a moment. So in 1876, Texas Constitution is ratified. We had an agrarian economy and manual tax collection. Fast forward, I should update that year, we have a very diversified economy. We're not an agrarian economy, and we have the ability to automatically collect taxes. So at local government, school services, police, fire, etc., they have nothing to do with the value of your property. Squat. Nothing at all. Likewise, the value of your property, if it's your home at least, has no bearing on your ability to pay your taxes. They are completely disconnected. Property tax in 2024 in Texas, or really anywhere else in America, does not make sense in 99.9% of cases. The value of your property is disconnected from anything that government cares about. Back in 1876, it probably made a lot of sense. In an agrarian economy, land is the primary means of producing wealth. They weren't thinking about that rental property that the widow was living in. They were thinking about farm and ranch land that was actually producing crops for sale, and cattle and such like. So what I'm advocating is transitioning from a property tax to a consumption tax. This is a true VAT, value-added tax. VAT's got a bad rap, deservedly, in some parts of the world where they're warped, and it's a compounding VAT. They tack on 10% on top of 10% on top of 10%, so that by the time it reaches the unsuspecting consumer, they end up paying like 70% tax on that stick of gum, and they don't know it. So when you can control what you spend, and everybody can do that to some degree. You can control what you spend. You can not buy that stick of gum. You know, you can choose one car method of transportation over another. You can choose to buy one house over another. Shelby can help you with that. When you go to the store and you buy something for $10, if you're charged $15 at the register, you know the government just took a 50% bite out of your butt. You know whom to hold accountable. That's more transparent, it's more fair, and that's one of the many reasons I advocate this. The reality is, I call property tax modern-day feudalism. You know, in the feudalist structure, you worked the land you were given at the sufferance of the local lord who actually owned the land. You know, you worked the land, you produced your crops, whatever you did on it, timber, etc., and you got to keep some of that for yourself to subsist, and the rest of it went to the lord who owned the land. That's feudalism. Kind of the same thing here. As long as there is a property tax, you do not own your home. For failure to pay that property tax, whether you are retired, whether you are disabled, is ultimately going to result in eviction by the local lord. Next slide, please. So I know you can't see this very well here, but you can download the deck from these QR codes on the wings and check this out. So in brief, this is the slide I created, the chart I created to illustrate how a consumption tax, a true value-added tax, would work in Texas. So I use Bluebell Creameries as the example, because everybody in Texas understands Bluebell. It was that or Whataburger. So I went with Bluebell. So Bluebell Creamery in Brenham, Texas, I've been there, in the county of Washington, has a fair amount of tourism, but they make a lot of ice cream, right? Very little retail presence in Brenham. There's a little bit. If you were to remove property taxes and remove and just keep sales tax, our current sales tax system, Brenham would die. County of Washington would die. There'd be nothing for them to fund local government with. The retail sales tax system that we have right now, the 6.25 plus optional 2%, that's based on the sale to the end consumer. You know, in a value-added tax, you're actually taxing every stage of value increase. Now, you know the value's increased because whomever's selling it to the next guy upcharges it. So hypothetically, you can see all these numbers here. You know, if you care to put yourself to sleep after you download the deck. You know, let's say Bluebell manufactures $1,000 worth of ice cream, you know, and they put all those half-gallon tubs on a truck and with the distributor. Distributor pays for the $1,000 of ice cream. They pay a 10% tax. Now, we think we can even get it under 8%, but let's say 10% to make the math easy. They pay $100 in tax. That $100 goes to the town of Brenham and the county of Washington to fund local government. Great. Distributor goes off to Waco, and they sell to, let's say they sell to an H-E-B hub in Waco. I don't even know if H-E-B's come to Waco yet, but it's come to Plano in Frisco. So they sell to an H-E-B hub. The distributor marks it up to $2,000 worth of ice cream. Exact same ice cream, they mark it up. So now the H-E-B in Waco pays $200 tax, okay? And now here's the beauty, using the exact same system that already exists with the Texas Comptroller. We don't even have to build anything new. We just have to reconfigure some tables. The distributor then applies for a credit with the comptroller for the tax they already paid when they bought the ice cream in Brenham from Bluebell. That way, it's not $100 on top of $200 on top of $400 that the end consumer pays, because that credit goes back through every transaction along the value chain, so that the end amount that you and I pay when we walk into the H-E-B in Bedford or Plano or anywhere else is still only 10%. That's the end amount. And we pick up that half gallon, let's say we're getting 2 half gallons for $10. Bless you. So we're getting 2 half gallons for $10. At the register, they charge us $11. And we know that the government has taken a 10% bite out of our butts. Far more fair and transparent. That is what we hope to accomplish in the future of Texas taxes. And last year, for the first time I ever saw in the state legislature, there was real focus put on the problem that is property taxes in Texas in the modern era. And I think we are starting to move that way. It's probably going to take more than a decade before it gets done, but we have started to move that way. Next slide, please. Now, I am pleased to hand it over to my friend Scott Grigg, who is going to teach you what to do with that appraisal notice you're about to get in the mail.
All right. Thank you, Shelby. So, go ahead to the next slide. Oh, all right. Real quick, just to give you a little bit of a history. Prior to 1980, we had every taxing entities doing the evaluation of your home. If you had 4 taxing entities, you may have 4 different values. So they created the Central Appraisal District. That way they do it for everybody, and everybody's taxed on the same value no matter who the taxing entity is. Property values are set on January 1st, and that's real important. So keep in mind, what is your condition? We're going to talk about conditions of houses. What is the condition of your home as of January 1st? If that new puppy you got for Christmas knocked over the Christmas candle and burned down half the living room, you got to remember that. So you got to make sure that you keep that in mind when you go to protest your property appraisals. There are to be done at market value. Now, the definition of market value is what a normal person would buy the property for during a normal amount of time. And there's exclusions to that. A good example I'd like to use, if the lot next to me is vacant, it's worth more to me than anybody else because I don't want anybody building there. That's where my kids play. So if I pay 10 times market value, it's because I have a vested interest in owning that lot. That should not be my new appraisal value because that's not the definition of market value. And it's even outlined in our statutes, our tax code. Tax code's about that thick. If you're having trouble sleeping, I will loan you my copy. As we talked about before, appraisal notices come out about April 15th. I got the first phone call today. Hey, I got my appraisal notice, and it says I owe this money. Why'd I get a tax bill? Okay, you don't get a tax bill in April. What happens is most of the time, so you get a little bit of an idea of what your tax burden might be, they use last year's tax rates versus your new appraisal rate to give you an idea. Now, here's the one thing I told you. I'm going to tell you something that the city councils, people like Shelby and other people hate when I say this. When the appraisal value is set, they have no idea what your tax rate is going to be because they are months away from setting that tax rate. However, when they set the tax rate, they know exactly what your appraisal value is. And they have the power to adjust your tax rate to offset the increase in your appraisal value. So just keep that in mind. I say that all the time, and I'm still getting endorsed by City Council and ISD school board members. So they know I'm telling the truth. They just hate when I say it. Protests must be filed by May 15th. That's the deadline per statute. If by chance your appraisal district doesn't get you your notice till the 20th or the 30th of April, you get 30 days. So it's May 15th or the later date of the 30 days when you get your appraisal notice. Okay, so keep that in mind. And the CAD cannot increase your value, your taxable value, more than 10%. Now, keep in mind, we talked a little bit, Shelby talked a bit about the debt ceiling, the ceilings for our disabled and our over 65. A lot of people get confused by that. Okay, I turned 65 this year, my tax liability is froze, and then they get their appraisal notice the next year, and their appraisal went up 50%. Okay, your ceiling does not stop your appraisal value from going up beyond the 10%. It doesn't stop your appraisal value from going up as much as they feel the market can account for. But your tax liability, if you're over 65 or disabled, that should stay the same if they offer the freeze. And you can go to your CAD and you can see how much each exemption is, whether they offer a freeze or not. Plano's a great example of a city that's proven they can offer a freeze, they can adopt a no new tax rate, and they can still provide the services that they need to. A lot of cities do not offer the freeze. So like in the city of McKinney, where I used to live prior to getting married, every entity would stay the same as far as tax liability for my neighbors that live down the street who were in their 80s, except for the city taxes, and they would continue to go up just a little bit. So just kind of keep that in mind. A lot of times, if they don't offer a freeze, you don't have that ceiling. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Should you bother to protest your taxes? I'm going to say the short answer is yes. Will everybody win? No. We're going to go over some things that you can do that has been very successful in the past, but I will tell you that appraisal districts are changing. In Collin County, there's a lot of the ARB seems to be working closer with the appraisals, and they don't give as many deductions as they once did. But I've already talked to the legislature. We're going to see about changing some of the statutes to help better protect the taxpayers, because ultimately that's what I ran on, to be the tax collector in Collin County, and that's what I've been an advocate for even before taking office. So just kind of keep that in mind. The lower the value you can get your value down, the less they can tax you on the following year. And there's a lot of firms out there, there's a lot of companies, you're going to get marketing mail say, hey, if you sign me up to do your protest, I'll do it for half of whatever you save. But not every one of them is going to be successful. I'm going to use Collin County numbers. Over 70,000 people protested their appraisals on a regular basis in Collin County. That's one side of your equation. And here's what I promote people to do all the time. You also need to hold your taxing entities available. If 10% of that 70,000 start showing up at school board meetings, city council meetings, commissioners court, and the voters were yelling at these people about what they were spending, don't you think they would take a little more notice? Because I'll guarantee you, I took 1 year and I did 15 tax rate meetings around the county. 6 people showed up at those meetings, total. And only one of them stood up and spoke, and all he did was introduce himself, said he was a local business owner, and didn't once call them to account for what they were spending his money on. So just kind of keep that in mind. Next slide. Okay. First of all, when your appraisal notice comes out, you need to very carefully review that. I have seen errors like the wrong square footage. I have seen errors like they forgot the homestead exemption. They forgot the over 65 exemption. And you will see that on your notice. If you remember back to the notice that we saw earlier. I'm going to take a moment here to make sure and kind of give people a warning. Part of our property tax relief in the last session was they challenged and told the appraisal districts, you must update your property rolls at least every 5 years. And some of the taxing entities, some of the CADs, have taken it above and beyond what the intentions of that bill was. The bill was to keep it current, keep it up to date. And they've sent out these letters basically threatening to take your exemptions away if you don't reapply. So we're going to have to, again, change some things in Austin and take this wrong interpretation of the way this bill was. So if you guys do get something from your appraisal district, don't do like some of the people I know and pitch it in the trash thinking it's just some marketing stuff and it's not really from your appraisal district, because you're only used to getting something from your appraisal district in April. And now all of a sudden you got something in January. Well, this doesn't belong to me. I'm going to pitch it in the trash. Don't risk losing your homestead exemption. Err on the side of caution. If you get a letter that says they need you to reapply for your homestead, please do. Because the last thing you want to do is, at least for that 1 year, have to pay extra taxes. Now, if the tax office does their job like they should, and the correction is made, you will get a refund, but that takes time to process refunds. So don't let them do that to you. Make sure, like I said, all your exemptions are there, the information's correct, the classification of your property. If you're living in a house and it says commercial, okay, that's wrong. Make sure your taxing entities are correct. In Collin County, we have 4. There's districts in Harris County that have 12 different taxing entities. Hospital districts, utility districts, special school, library exemptions. The new one in Collin County that comes up a lot is property improvement districts. And what that is the developer has basically taken what they used to pay for, the streets, the lights and all that stuff, and put it onto the property tax. So you get $3,000 from all the taxing entities, and you get another $3,000 for public improvement districts. So if you're out looking for property, if Shelby's out taking you looking for property, ask her, hey, is this a public PID? Because you don't want to pay that extra tax. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Yeah. Are you a good candidate to protest? I'm going to tell you, not everybody is. If your house it comes back and it's $350, and you know that 3 of the houses down the street have sold for about $400,000 in the past 30 days, you might just want to be quiet. Let's not let the appraisal district know that the houses are selling for $400,000. I'll be honest with you, when I sold the house, when we got married, we had 2 houses. We sold mine. I would not have paid you what those people paid me for my house. I guarantee you. The market supported it, but I wouldn't have paid you that much. So get with a real estate professional. We brought one tonight. She's got, like I said, the flyers out front. You can talk to her. If you've got a friend that's in real estate, call them. And what you're going to need is comps. First of all, with the comps, we'll go a little bit into that. You need at least 3 comps. Call the appraisal district and say, what comps did you use to set my value? And sometimes you'll find that your house is 20 years old, and they went 3 miles down the road to a brand new subdivision, and that's the houses they used to comp your house. So ask them, and they have to give it to you. Ask them, what houses did you use to determine my value? And then get your own, because you need battle. You're going into a fight. We don't want to be confrontational, but that's what you're doing. You're there to fight. Try to get sales as close to January 1st as you can. If you can get it within 3 or 4 weeks before or 3 or 4 weeks after, that would be optimal. You know, if you come in April and you tell them, oh, well, the house down the street sold last week, that's not your value of January 1st. You need to make sure you get it close as you can. Call the Central Appraisal District, like I said, get their comps, and like I said, they are required to give it to you. And a lot of times when they start pulling their comps, they may realize a mistake and they may offer you a deal to lower your property before you ever go in there to do the official protest. Okay, next slide. All right, we're going to talk about the condition of the house. We talk about repairs. I think everybody in this room that's a homeowner will agree with this statement. Our home is our biggest investment. We spend more money on our home, and we're proud of that home. But sometimes we have to step aside and take the emotional side out. That is where we raised our kids. That is where we meet with our family. We have a lot of emotional connection to that house. And we look at it as a very valuable thing. Okay, when it comes to this, you need to look at it as the biggest dump on the street. Okay? You need to criticize it any way you can. You know, if there's worn out carpet, you need to take that into account. If you still got Formica countertops or peel and stick vinyl tiles or the 1970 shag carpet, keep that in mind. Okay. Take pictures of all those repairs. Like I said, an example of the fire around Christmas. Or say there was a big storm, like the hailstorms that are coming through now. If you didn't have your roof fixed before January 1st, that's a repair that needs to be done. And it's a very costly repair. Keep that in mind. Take your pictures. Get written estimates. Don't just walk in there and say, well, you know what? I went down to the Lowe's and they said it's going to cost me $5,000 to put new carpet in. Get it in writing. Don't go in there. Be organized. Gather all that documentation. If you did some repairs after January 1st, say the 3rd week of January, you had your new roof put on. That's documentation you can use to fight what they appraise your value at on January 1st. So keep that in mind. Make a list of all the upgrades that the comps they gave you. Okay? If you like your shag carpet and you like your Formica countertops, but every comp that they gave you has hardwood floors, marble tile, granite countertops, they've got all fresh paint, and you haven't done any of that, keep that in mind. Get written estimates on what it would take for you to bring your house up to those standards. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go out and actually spend the money to do it. But you need to get that documentation and figure out what is going to make your house compare to what they're saying, apples to apples. Okay. Like I said, just kind of keep those things in mind. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now that you have all the information together, and you got your little binder, or you got your notebook, or you got a box, don't do like a lot of the people that when I took my property tax or my income tax class in college, and they handed me a big envelope full of receipts and dumped it out on the table and says, now calculate this guy's taxes. Don't do that, because you're not going to get anywhere. Go to the CAD, ask to see an appraiser. Sometimes you can go and you see the appraiser and they'll look at what you have and they may realize, hey, this guy's got a good case, and they'll offer you a deal. If they offer you $30,000 and that's where you think your house already was, take it and run, because it's going to take time to come back and actually present your protest. So keep your mind around, okay, is it worth the time to come back and all that kind of thing. So kind of keep that in mind. If there's no appointment required, sometimes they do have appointments required. We still got a few appraisal districts that are still working on the, they'd rather do Zoom and that kind of thing, but a lot of them have gone back to face-to-face. If the offer you get is not satisfactory, then you do have another option. Austin has built in options for us. If the appraiser says no, we have an appraisal review board that is made up of taxpayers just like you. They serve on for 2-year terms, and you can go in front of a 3-person panel and present your case. But I will warn you, don't be argumentative. If you walk in there and you're mad and you walk in there and automatically you start yelling and screaming at these people, I will almost guarantee you're not going to get a penny off your appraisal, because you put them on the defensive already, and they're just not going to do it. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Here, a little more detail about the ARB. Like I said, it's a 3-person panel made up of taxpayers. When you file the protest, they usually schedule it. Like I said, in Collin County, 70,000 protests. That's a lot of moving parts to try to get in there and talk to them. That's another reason why they do try to offer different amounts before you get to this point, because otherwise they're not going to be able to handle it. Because they have to have a certified tax roll by June, because why? We already talked about it. The ISD needs to set their tax rate. And they have to get that by June 1st, and they have to have a certain amount of those protests taken care of before they can certify their tax roll. Okay? Typically, the appraisal district, unless you ask to go first, they are to present their case first. Remember, you already have their comp, so you pretty much know what they're going to say. You can prepare for that. And then you will have a chance to talk. The panel will make a decision, and they'll determine whether there's adjustment. However, keep in mind, this is not the end of the road. Now, this is the end of the cheapest option to protest your taxes, but it's not the end of the road. We can actually protest to the state, or we can file a lawsuit in district court. Most of the lawsuits filed in district court are by big corporations. You'll see Lowe's go in and say, okay, we're going to protest every Lowe's building in Collin County. And they'll file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit to try to get all this stuff done. Okay. So keep in mind on whether you're willing to spend that kind of time and money to do that, okay? Next slide. Okay. So once you get your comp, the counties, be informed, just kind of a recap here. Be informed about your appraisal and your protests. Attend the school board meetings, city councils like I talked about. Like I said, there's no reason to fight one side of this equation if we're not willing to fight the other side, because you got to keep both of them under control. Okay, school board set the rate in June. Cities and counties do it in September. We hear this a lot. Local elections matter. If you don't put the right people on school boards, if you don't put the right people on city council, one of the things that they're going to get you on is they're going to continue to tax you. I remember when Shelby ran the first time. We had two candidates that we were trying to get on there because they had some conservative guys on that board, but they were constantly being outvoted. They needed 2 more votes. I don't even live in Plano, and I knocked over 3,000 doors for this man because I wanted to make sure that the citizens of Collin County were taken care of. So if you're not sure who represents you, you can actually go to this, who represents me in Texas, and it'll tell you everybody that represents you. If you get a true servant who wants to, they're going to be out here helping you. That's one reason I ran. I'm a terrible politician because I'm terrible at lying. But I feel called to serve, and with my skill set and stuff, the tax collector is where I felt I was called most to serve. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Next slide, I'm not sure which one it is, but I think this may be that. Okay, so.
Awesome.
Very good. Did you guys get anything so far? What are your questions? Come on now. I know somebody. Gerald, come on down. I'm not going to make Pastor Nancy walk all the way back there to you. So you at least meet her halfway. She's coming to meet you now.
Are you out there? Oh, it's
There
Gerald.
he is.
Hey, Gerald.
Okay. She knows if I get a hold of it, I won't quit talking. This is kind of a little off question. You mentioned the school districts and everything. How does the lottery and the racetracks affect that?
That's a very good question. There's not a lot of transparency in where that money's going. What happens with the bulk of that money is it goes into the general fund. And once it hits the general fund, it gets very, very hard for them to track. So that's one of the, I hate to say that's the answer, but that's about the best answer we got, because I ask that question a lot, because I do try to work with the legislature all the time when I see tax, especially property tax stuff that comes up. This last session, Senate was doing one thing, House was doing another thing. What the Senate was doing was not helping elderlies enough, the elderly citizens, so I went and I called them. I don't say this as a form of brag, but there's a reason why I have their cell phone numbers in my cell phone, because I bug them until they listen to me. And I bug them because people like you and other people that, when I'm knocking on doors, share their concerns, and I pass those concerns on. I've even shared concerns I've heard while knocking doors to Shelby before, saying, hey, because they'll start talking about stuff I have nothing to do, especially as a tax collector. They're complaining about that pothole. I can't do anything. I don't know how to fill a pothole to save my life. But I know people who know people that can do it. So.
No, that's right. The general fund is just a giant pool of money, and like Scott said, tracking where it goes from there is impossible. But
General fund for what?
the state.
The state general fund, it's basically equivalent if you took a glass of water and poured it into the swimming pool, and you want to know what happened to that glass of water.
Yeah. That glass of water is the lottery money, and they just dump it in the pool.
Yeah, they dump it in the big pool. Unless you put, even if it was colored water, it's going to get so diluted in the pool, you're not going to, if you poured dark red liquid in there, it's not going to take long before it's all clear again.
But money, in the end, money is fungible. It doesn't matter which column it's in. In the general fund, it's just part of the same pool.
It doesn't go directly to the school district, it goes just to the fund.
They say it filters to the school districts, but I've yet to see the transparency to prove that.
Yeah, when you dip your bucket into the pool, you're going to get some of that diluted colored water.
Yeah.
Next question.
I have a really good question. I live in a house, I think it's worth about $250 right now. And when we got our property tax bill, I live in Dallas. We got our property tax bill this year. We're obviously well over 65. Our tax bill is $118. We paid it real fast. But I really don't understand this at all, because, before we were old, our taxes were like three grand a year or something like that. And then we got our homestead exemption and all that, and it came down. But how can it be that low? But the scary thing is, what's going to happen next?
Don't get used to it. That's that sales tax surplus, that state sales tax surplus that was used to buy down the school maintenance and operations. So basically, the state of Texas just paid your school taxes for you. Don't count on that happening next time we're in.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Anytime there's a change in tax law, what they do is they take your account and they remove all exemptions, they reapply everything new, and they set your new freeze amount, your ceiling, what your liability is going to be. If they put all that in, your liability would have gone up, then you go back to where you were. If it goes down, then that sets your new ceiling. So And for the record, when we're talking about those ceilings, they can transfer from property to property as a percentage, not as a dollar amount, but as a percentage. So if you're only paying 30% of the taxes you would pay otherwise, if you move to another home, you will then only pay 30% of what your taxes would be otherwise. So
If
just
you're
gonna-
frozen, I didn't get that benefit.
if the taxing entity offers the freeze. Okay. No problem.
Another question?
All right. Got one behind you.
Oh, hi. Okay, what's your question?
So, do they send somebody out to like look at your house? So you can just get all this documentation of all the messed up things about your house and then protest it?
They don't have the manpower to send somebody to every single. I will tell you some of the tools they use: drones, satellite pictures. They'll look at a satellite picture and all of a sudden they look and say, "Wait a minute, there's a big addition to the back of that house we didn't know about." Now, in that case, they may send somebody out to have a closer look. Is it just a covered patio or is it an air-conditioned, space, living space? In general, what they do is they go in and they do what they call mass appraisals. And they go into the neighborhood and they've done their homework. They know that most of the houses have this kind of amenities, they use this kind of building material, and they value it at so much per square foot. Now, square foot isn't the end all of that. Shelby can tell you, and I used to sell real estate as well. The smallest house in the neighborhood will always sell at a higher price per square foot than the biggest house. Because the value of the house, that neighborhood, there's a certain value to how desirable it is. You're there because you want the school. You're there because you want to be close to work, as Shelby talked about. You're there because it's close to getting to the Stars game, and as a Stars fan, my house is not very good for that. But there's a certain value. So if you go in there and only argue price per square foot, most of the time they're going to shoot you down because there's certain intangibles about your neighborhood that they take into consideration. Number of how many rental properties is in the neighborhood is something that they look at. And that's something else that I didn't bring it up when I was talking about. If you know that you've got 12 houses on your neighborhood, on your street, and 10 of them are rentals, and they're not being taken care of, take pictures of that. The yards are grown up. There's no flowers. The landscaping is non-existent. That does impact the value. I was talking to City Councilman in Allen the other day. There's a certain intersection that's very busy that most realtors will drive way out of their way to keep away from that intersection because it's a bunch of rundown shopping centers, and it's not very flattering for the city. So I hope that answered your question. It's not a one-on-one, but they do, like I said, these mass appraisals, satellite pictures, they've used drones. There's several different tools that they use, and sometimes they use the tools that they get from the protest. They take my 3 comps and they key it into their system, and now they have sales data that they didn't have before.
So you can only keep it from raising. You can never lower it back down, right? Once it gets to
But your
a certain
goal to
number.
protest is to get it down. And now, as the market, if we were to have a collapse of the real estate market like we have in the past, and our $350,000 houses are all of a sudden worth $200,000, then because the appraisal district is set that they do on market value, they should lower your appraisal value. Now then, when that happens, you're going to see the tax rates go up. Not necessarily enough to raise taxes, but they will go up enough to offset the decrease in appraised values.
So
Make sure your local taxing authorities don't milk it.
Yeah.
okay, so if you get your numbers and it seems pretty close to what everything's worth in your neighborhood, then just be like, I'm good.
I'm going to be honest with you, I've never protested my appraisal value.
Neither have I.
And like I said, not everybody does. I mean, I teach a seminar, I talk about it, I promote it. I think it's a great thing. It's a tool that the legislature has given us, but I have never, since moving to Texas, protested my appraisal value.
I'll tell you just quickly, I protest most years, many times with the tools I've learned from Scott. When you go and file your protest online, they ask you to put in what you think the reasonable value of your home is, and assuming you have some real idea of that and you think it's the fair market value is worth less than what they're appraising it at, go ahead and put in that number. Sometimes they'll just make you an offer. You know, maybe it's $5,000 off, maybe it's $10,000 off, maybe it's $5, but they'll make you an offer because, as Scott said, they're expecting tens of thousands of people to protest, and they can't handle that volume without just trying to reduce the workload somehow.
Next question.
Okay, so I guess I've been successful in the past to lower my, the value I've gone to protest.
Congratulations.
I've been lucky or blessed because I've just kind of taken some tools that I didn't understand here. Last appraisal, because I didn't make the meeting or the hearing, it hiked it up 30,000 on my house, and I was like, oh my gosh. So back on the question that the lady said, I can try to lower that, but my question is, where do I get the comps from my area? You mentioned there are 3 comps that the CAD has. I go directly to them?
Okay, you'll get the 3 from the CAD, and that'll show you what they're using. You need to come up with 3 of your own, and that's when real estate professionals such as Shelby will help you. You know, if your brother-in-law sells real estate, he can get you those comps. But reach out to a taxing professional because you want to go in there with the information to support your cause.
Because I've done it in the past without the CADs. I didn't even know they came with the 3 comps. I mean,
Right, and sometimes they will. If you go in with some of this other stuff, they'll say, okay, we appraised it that the house was in this condition and now we're told it's not. We will adjust it accordingly. But if it's one of those things, if you get that 3-person panel that is not very cooperative, then you need all the information you get. So you do need to get those 3 comps. I mean, if you can get more than 3, that's fine. But it needs to be near your house, like houses. If your house is 20 years old, don't pull the house that was built 3 years ago in as far as those comps. And a real estate professional will help you on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's where it's important to understand the difference between the county's comps, because they've already got their comps, and like Scott said, they have to share them with you. But then you want to arm yourself with your own comps, which is where a real estate professional like Shelby can help you.
Next question.
Property taxes. You mentioned consumption tax. How feasible is that? And any idea of how to bring it about?
We have filed bills in the state legislature the past 2 sessions. Representative James White carried it in the House 2 sessions ago. Cody Vasut carried it last year. They didn't pass, but we're garnering more attention year by year. So to answer your first question, how viable is it? A consumption tax, a value-add tax. In a state like Texas, I think it's incredibly viable. If you try, because there's a dynamic. Let's just say it's a 10%, tax statewide. If you've got people on the borders of the state that are jumping across to Louisiana or Oklahoma and paying half the tax, they're going to do that on some things, especially things like cars. In a state like Texas, the largest state in the contiguous United States, only so many people can jump across the border and pay a little bit less taxes. Maybe in a state like Rhode Island, it's not going to be as viable. But in Texas, it's entirely viable, especially because we have such a diverse economy now here in 2024. And I didn't touch on this, but one of the benefits of this would be to promote further diversity of the commercial base city by city. So let's say you got rid of property taxes and you just moved to the current state sales tax, and that's how you funded everything. Well, then suddenly cities are going to be hyper incentivized to build retail and just have retail because then they're getting all the retail sales tax. When you have a value add tax like this and literally every stage of production is taxed based on its value, then city councils and the entire state are incentivized to diversify their commercial base, which creates a healthier community and creates a healthier state. But overcoming the property tax system that's just ingrained in everybody's mind in our entire economy and way of doing things. You can't flip that overnight. So it's going to take a while to implement, many years to implement. First, it's going to take many years to just get it to pass the legislature. And then it's going to take many more years to phase it in. And it's going to have to be phased in so that we don't suffer a sudden economic jolt. But I think it's very tenable.
All right. I'm going to have Pastor Nancy close the stream real quick. But thank you guys for tuning in on the stream. But I'm going to have her close that out. But I want to remind you to join us next week when we have Dr. Richard Bartlett. He's going to dig into some other details of COVID that you guys didn't talk about, that we didn't talk about last time I had him. If you guys remember, he was the doctor that was in the operating room. He's going to be here in person next Wednesday night, and he's going to talk about the preventatives for the bird flu that has been just unleashed on us as Americans. And so he's going to give you what you need to prepare yourself to stay healthy as the bird flu takes us into trying to get you back into your houses and all of the mask and social distancing. And so it's basically going to be the new version of COVID, but he has all the insight on that. And so I want you to be here 7 o'clock. It's going to be a lot of great information. 6:30 for prayer with Pastor Nancy. Don't forget to reach out to Pastor Nancy to order these items. Love you guys. Here's Pastor Nancy to close you out.
Thank you, Pastor Troy. Stream, thanks for being with us. And isn't it nice that we're able to stream these services so that no matter what's going on with your family, your kids, your school, whatever, you can get this information? Personally, I have enjoyed every single one. I think all of us have too. And even when a topic comes up that is like, well, I don't really know about that, I learned something new. If all we learn is a vocabulary to use as we talk to other people or as we ask questions to elected officials, that's of value. So God bless you. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you Sunday on stream or next Wednesday. Bye now.